can say that I feel like home here. There are many historical bonds between the two countries, Greece, where I come from, and Korea. So let me begin my paper. The study of the pre-Greek scripts encompasses a rich and complex history of writing systems that were used in the Aegean region before the emergence of the Greek alphabet in the 8th century BC. These scripts represent some of the earliest forms of written expression in Europe, providing critical insight into the development of literacy and administration in the ancient Aegean world. The major pre-Greek scripts, pre-alphabetic scripts, include Cretan hieroglyphic, linear A and linear B. Each of these systems demonstrates a unique evolution of writing influenced by earlier Near Eastern traditions, which also exhibit distinct local innovation. Except for linear B, all of the rest pre-Greek scripts that predate or even coincide with it remain undeciphered, despite hundreds of serious but largely speculative efforts made thus far to decode their ideograms and phonetic signs. The oldest writing system among the pre-Greek scripts is the Cretan hieroglyphic, an exclusively pictographic script found primarily on the island of Crete and associated with the Middle Minoan Age. This was a period of dramatic cultural, architectural, and economic development characterized by the emergence of the first palaces at sites like Festos and Knossos. The increase of administrative needs during that time is supposed to have driven the invention of a writing system, which appears inscribed on clay tablets, seals, and vessels used for commercial and religious purposes. This script comprised roughly 100 symbols, including both ideograms and phonetic signs. While it developed independently on Crete, it was part of a broader milieu of early writing influenced by Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian cuneiform. Today, the updated glyph inventory consists of 96 syllabograms that denote sounds, with 10 of them also serving as logograms, representing whole words or parts of words, while in addition, there are 23 logograms that denote 4 levels of numbers, units, tens, hundreds, thousands, 9 symbols for fractional numbers, and 2 signs for punctuation. Cretan hieroglyphs ceased to be used around the 17th century BC, during the transition from the first palace period to the second palace period of Minoan Crete. Although there is no concise explanation of the historical context of this cessation, the destruction of the first palaces after a major natural disaster, likely an earthquake, it is commonly referred as the main reason, inasmuch as the Cretan hieroglyphs were mostly used in these administrative centers for sealing goods, record keeping, etc. Following the destruction of these palatial complexes, the Minoans embarked on an extensive reconstruction project of their palaces such as Knossos and Festos. Additionally, the Cretans had to adopt a new writing system for their administrative functions, and that was linear A. This is a syllabic script derived in part from Cretan hieroglyphic, while the widest distribution of text in linear A is attested in Crete. Linear A tablets have been also found on other Aegean islands as well, like Samothrace, Kythera, Thera, Milos, and Kea, in the Peloponnese, and as well as in Asia Minor or even in Israel. Compared to the Cretan hieroglyphs, at least, which were found on seals, linear A tablets represented a more evolved, flexible, and simplified script that was better suited for tablet writing. It regularly appears on clay tablets, which survived the fires that destroyed the Minoan palaces. So all in all, linear A includes around 90 syllabic signs and several ideograms. Most of them exhibit a more streamlined and linear form, hence the name given to it, by Arthur Evans. Most of its 90 syllabic signs represent either open syllables like consonant plus vowel or poor vowels. And this is to say that there are no signs for closed syllables, consonant clusters, or final consonants. Some linear A signs that resemble linear B signs in form and phonetic value, but these values are not guaranteed to match always. Linear A thus includes ideograms mostly for commodities, grain, wine, olive oil, wool, animals, goods, sheep, and containers. Furthermore, there are many symbols in linear A whose sound and purposes remain unknown. This is why this script remains undeciphered, though it is presumed to represent a pre-Greek, non-Indo-European language, sometimes referred to simply as Minoan. I'm going to conclude this brief overview of pre-Greek scripts with one of the most renowned and intriguing Minoan artifacts from the Middle or Late Bronze Age. Its unique script and the challenges associated with its decipherment continue to pose a significant challenge for archaeologists and philologists. This artifact, which has been aptly characterized as the enigma of the Minoan script, is no other than the famous Festus disc, a circular tablet discovered in the early 20th century at the Minoan Palace of Festus on Greece. Both of its sides are imprinted with symbols, totaling 242 discrete impressions that are arranged in 61 signboards. Scholars generally agree that the inscription is meant to be read spirally, beginning at the outer rim and moving inward. These impressions include 45 distinct but identifiable signs of people, animals, plants, and objects. These are too many to represent an alphabet, yet too few to support a purely logographic or ideographic system such as Chinese. Now, as observed thus far, linear A was primarily used on Crete and various Aegean islands from approximately the 18th century BCE and was associated with the Minoan civilization, its rich culture and administration centers. Against this background, linear B must have evolved slightly later. It is derived from linear A, of course, but was adapted by the Mycenaean Greeks to write an early form of the Greek language. This adaptation likely occurred during the 14th century BCE, the time Mycenaean expansion in Crete, following the decline of Minoan dominance. The Mycenaean Greeks adopted this new script mainly for administrative use in their own palatial centers, such as Pylos and Mycenae. Now, linear B tablets, as you can see, were first discovered by Arthur Evans in the early 20th century. Despite his copious attempt to interpret the script, linear B remained unreadable because its language and phonetic values were unknown. The breakthrough came some 30 years later in the early 50s through the work of Michael Ventris, an English architect and self-taught linguist with significant scholarly support from John Chadwick, a classical philologist. Nowadays, the scholarly community acknowledges linear B as a syllabic script consisting of about 87 syllabic signs and over 100 ideograms. Each sign represents a syllable that is either a pure volume, a vowel, or a consonant and a vowel. The decipherment demonstrated that Greek was spoken in the late Bronze Age Aegean, providing linguistic evidence for the continuity of Greek-speaking populations in the Aegean from the Bronze Age into the Classical period. Now, as suggested, linear A appears in a broader array of religious and ritual contexts, including libation tables and offering inscriptions. On the contrary, linear B is almost exclusively administrative, found on clay tablets and used to track inventories, personnel, and resource distribution. in palatial centers under the king's supervision. This indicates a major change in linguistic and cultural practices between the Minoans and the Mycenaeans in terms of how writing was employed. Now, let's move to the Bronze Age, to the Late Bronze Age and the Dark Ages. In his dialogue, here are some examples of linear B logograms. In his dialogue Timaeus, Plato mentions that the Greeks had a writing system before the destruction of Atlantis, but it was subsequently lost due to a natural disaster. The story, as told by an Egyptian priest to Solon, the ancient philosopher, suggests that the Greeks had a civilization capable of writing before a catastrophic event wiped out their knowledge and writing. According to the Egyptian priest also, Greece repeatedly lost its writing and other cultural memory through catastrophes, while Egypt preserved continuous written records in their temples. Thus the Greeks, as the priest says, have the memory of children, because every time after a disaster, a natural disaster, they forget their language system. This is also seems to be the case with the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, followed by a period that scholars call the Greek Dark Ages, from 1100 BC to 800 BC. This era is marked by the mysterious disappearance of linear B from the Greek world, the intricate script once used for record keeping and communication. As the glittering palaces and trade networks of the Mycenaean world faded into obscurity, the landscape of ancient Greece changed dramatically, leading to a profound transformation in society and culture. The Greek alphabet, as we know it, began to take shape around 8th century BC, when the Greeks came in contact with the Phoenicians, a Semitic people from the Levant who had a consonant-based writing system. The adoption took place during the Greek geometric period, when renewed contact with the Near East brought artistic, technological, and linguistic experience through maritime trade. Now, in one of his most captivating tales, the ancient historian Herodotus recounts the story of Cadmus, a legendary Phoenician who brought the alphabet to Greeks, forever changing the course of their written language and culture. Regardless of the much debated accuracy of Herodotus' tale, the Greeks in the archaic and the classical era were fully aware that their ancestors had adopted the alphabet from the Phoenicians. A fragment from the ancient Athenian philosopher and political leader Critias attributes the invention of writing clearly to the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians invented these speech savers. Further archaeological evidence suggests that the Greeks came in contact with the Phoenicians through trade, colonization, and cultural exchange in the Eastern Mediterranean during the early first millennium BCE. Now, you all know many things probably about the Phoenician script, so let me give you only its basic features. As you know, it was a consonantal script, abjad, of 22 signs. Each sign represented a single consonantal sound. Vowels were left for the reader to supply from context. The direction of writing was right to left, and where early inscriptions occasionally show the so-called boustrophedon alternation. Also, it was based on the acrophonic principle. That means that letter names began with the sound they represented, aleph, bet, gimel, etc. There was no also word separation in early Europe usage. Now, for their part, the Greeks made significant innovations. The most important are those you see here. I refer only to the basic. The creation, first of all, of vowel letters. The Greeks kept the basic letter shapes and order, but made a major innovation. They used certain Phoenician consonant symbols to represent vowel sounds, since Greek had more vowel contrasts than Phoenician. So they turned Aleph into A, He into Epsilon, Yun into Omicron, Yod into Iota, and Wow into Epsilon. Now, further adjustments were made for Greek consonants. This involved the addition of few letters for sounds absent in Phoenician. Thus we have C, He, and F, Phi. Now, the Greeks reassigned some Phoenician letters to different Greek sounds. This is the case with Kopa, which was later dropped by most dialects. Now, a major change finally was to the writing direction. While early Greek inscriptions sometimes kept the right to left direction, by the 5th century BCE, left to right became standard. Now, unlike Phoenician, which remained primarily a mercantile and monumental script, the Greek alphabet was rapidly applied to epic poetry, public inscriptions, laws, dedications, epitaphs, and private marks. The oldest known fragmentary Greek inscription date back to the 2nd century BC. And this is the case with the famous cup of Nestor and the Dipylon inscription, which was a short text scratched on an inochoid. Now, their letters resemble those of the Phoenician alphabet, since there is no word separation, and the direction of writing is right to left. From 800 until 400 BC, various local variants developed throughout the Greek world. Local variants of the Greek alphabet. The most important are the Attic alphabet, the so-called Ionic alphabet, and the Ebian or Chalkidian or Kume alphabet, which was primarily used in Euboea and the colonies of Chalkis and Eretria in Italy and Sicily, and eventually gave rise to the Latin alphabet, as we shall see. Now, the Ionic alphabet was the alphabet written in which were the Greek tragedies, the Greek poetry, the Homeric epics were written. This is the script of the Athenian tragedians like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, and the comedian Aristophanes. But what is most important is, for our research, is the so-called Chalkidian alphabet, because this alphabet it provided a very important, significant contribution to world culture, because it transmitted the Greek alphabet westward, which ultimately led to the development of the Latin alphabet and its widespread use today. The key intermediaries between the Greek and Latin alphabets were the ancient Etruscans, a civilization in central Italy which flourished from 7th century to 4th century BC. These people inhabited Etruria, modern-day Tuscany, before the Roman expansion in Latium, and they formed a federation of city-states which adopted the Western Greek alphabet from Ebian colonists. The latter had arrived in Campania from Chalkis and Eretria, as we just said, in the 8th century BC, and founded the city of Cuma and Pithecusae, very close to Naples. The Etruscans adapted the Chalkidian script to their language, which had different phonetic needs than Greek, gradually dropping some letters for sounds they didn't need, like Vita, like Delta, and most of all, like Gamma. They didn't need this letter and they replaced them. Also, they dropped Omega because they needed only one sound for O, that was enough, but they retained Eta, although they didn't use it as a vowel but as a consonant. Now, as mentioned, in the 5th century, the Etruscans lost their power. Their last king, Tarquinius Superbus, was the king of Rome, and he was expelled. The Romans borrowed and adapted the Etruscan alphabet to create the Latin alphabet. modifying it further to suit the Latin language. The earliest Latin inscriptions date back to the 6th century BC. The most famous one is the Duenos inscription. This is written right to left again in 3 units without spaces to separate the words, and is scratched on the sides of a kernos, a trio of small globular vases. Nevertheless, thanks to this inscription and others, we know that the early Latin alphabet had 21 letters. Following the adaptations made by the Etruscans to the Chalkidian alphabet, the Romans added the letter G by splitting C and gamma. The crucial addition was made during the 3rd century BC. At that time, the Romans removed even zeta, whose sound wasn't needed in Latin. They also introduced a numerical system, of course, by making further adaptations to the Etruscan numbering system. Finally, the ancient Romans developed the so-called cursive script, an informal handwriting system used for everyday purposes such as letters, accounts, notes, and school exercises. This has a further paleographic significance, not only because it illustrates the dynamic nature of Latin alphabet, of Latin script development, but also because it influenced later Latin handwriting tradition, thereby becoming the foundation of modern lowercase letters. During the Middle Ages, the Romans added the letters J, U, and W to distinguish between sounds already represented. In particular, U shifted for the, which in turn evolved into a W. By the 15th century after Christ, the modern 26-letter Latin alphabet was almost complete. Through Roman Empire influence, Christianity, and especially through European colonialism, the Latin alphabet was spread worldwide. To sum up, the trajectory of the Greek alphabet from its origins in the adaptation of the Phoenician consonantal system to its transmission into the Latin script represents a pivotal moment in the cultural history of ancient Mediterranean. Earlier Aegean systems like Cretan hieroglyphic linear A and linear B, which had remained confined to narrow and administrative or ritual functions accessible to a limited scribal class, constitutes a different case. The Greek alphabet, however, by innovating a full notation of vowels, transformed writing into a medium of universal application. It allowed for the precise rendering of Greek phonology and thus became the vehicle not just for record keeping, as is the case of linear A and linear B, but also for epic poetry, philosophy, historiography, and law. The diffusion of this writing system westward via the Chalkidian variant provided a critical link to Rome. The Etruscans mediated between Hellenic and Italic worlds before the Romans themselves appropriated and standardized it into the Latin alphabet. With this development, Rome inherited not merely the external form of Greek letters, but also the intellectual capital encoded in them. Overall, the Greek alphabet thus constitutes more than a writing system. It is a cultural bridge linking the fragmenting syllabaries of the Bronze Age with the Latin script that would dominate medieval and modern Europe. It embodies both rupture and continuity, conquest and assimilation. Its paradoxical legacy still endures. The voice of Greeks, politically subdued, yet intellectually triumphant, still resonates today in every letter of the Latin script. Thank you.
이번 발표를 통해서 고대 지중해 문화사에서 중요한 전환점을 이룬 그리스 알파벳 형성과 라틴 문자로의 이행 과정을 보다 잘 이해할 수 있었습니다. 발표 원고 중에 이런 말이 있더라고요. 정복당한 그리스가 오히려 로마를 정복했다. 호라티우스의 이 말처럼 이번 발표는 문자가 문명을 이끄는 힘이라는 것을 다시금 확인할 수 있었습니다. 다시 한번 큰 박수 부탁드립니다.